The rain wasn't just falling. It was trying to erase the mountain. I stood knee-deep in the mud trench I'd been digging for the last 4 hours, watching the drainage pipe buckle under the pressure. If this retaining wall failed before the county inspector arrived on Tuesday, Councilman Rigg would have the excuse he needed to condemn the property and seize my grandfather's land. I wiped a mixture of grit and water from my eyes, my muscles screaming in protest as I jammed a pry bar behind the timber. That's when I heard the horn. It was a pathetic, strangled sound, barely audible over the roar of the wind, but it didn't belong here. Nothing belonged up here on the ridge except me, the unfinished timber frame behind me, and the silence I'd fought so hard to secure. I climbed out of the trench, my boots heavy with clay, and wiped my hands on my sodden gray t-shirt. I grabbed the lantern from the porch railing. The beam cut through the deluge, illuminating a silver sedan violently beached on the berm of my service road. The front bumper was buried in the mud. Steam hissed from the grill. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I caught the glint of 2 suitcase handles in the back seat. A tan duffel sat on the floorboard, already damp at the seams, proof they hadn't been joyriding. They'd been traveling. I walked over, shoulders hunched against the stinging rain. The driver's window rolled down 2 inches, revealing a slice of frantic blue eyes and blonde hair plastered to a forehead. "We're stuck," the driver yelled. She looked young panic, hiding behind a forced smile. A clear hooded raincoat clung to her shoulders like cellophane. I can see that I shouted back. The wind tore the words away. "Can we come in, just until it stops?" I looked at the car. The axle was deep. The storm was upgrading from a temper tantrum to a full-blown assault. I looked back at my cabin, my sanctuary, my workspace, my only defense against the world. It was a 1-room shell with a wood stove and a loft I hadn't finished railing yet. "It's not going to stop," I said, my voice flat. The passenger door opened. A second woman stepped out. She was taller, composed, even in a clear plastic poncho that was whipping violently in the wind. She moved with a kind of deliberate grace that made me pause. She walked around the hood of the car, ignoring the mud ruining her boots, and met my gaze. She looked like the driver, same blonde hair, same structure, but where the driver was frantic energy, this woman was steel. Her eyes were dark with exhaustion, but she held her chin high. "We don't need a rescue," she said, her voice cutting clearly through the storm. "We just need a phone. Ours have no signal. Landlines down. Lines blew out an hour ago." She stared at me, raindrops racing down her cheeks. She didn't plead. She calculated. "We're only staying 1 night," the younger one yelled from the car window. Just until dawn, she shoved the door open and hopped out anyway, dragging a rolling suitcase through the mud. The hood of her clear raincoat was up now, rain beating on it. She wrestled the tan duffel out after it and hefted it like she'd done it 100 times. I looked at the older one. Madeline, I'd learn later. She was shivering, a fine tremor running through her frame that she was fighting to hide. "I have only 1 bed," I said. Madeline didn't flinch. "The floor is dry, isn't it, mostly? Then we'll take it." 20 minutes later, my sanctuary felt like a crowded elevator. The younger one, Paisley, was vibrating with nervous energy, pacing the small perimeter of the open floor plan. She was 26, chatting a mile a minute about the wedding venue they were supposed to be scouting 3 towns over and how the GPS had betrayed them. Madeline stood by the wood stove, her back to the room. She had shed the wet poncho. Underneath, she wore a tailored blazer that probably cost more than my truck, now damp at the shoulders. She was 37, she'd corrected Paisley's old maid joke with a dry look, and she held herself like someone waiting for a firing squad. "This is..." Rustic, Paisley said, touching a stack of plain cedar beams I'd prepped for the deck. "It's a work site," I corrected, throwing another log into the stove. The heat was finally starting to cut the damp chill. "I live here because I'm building it." "It's beautiful," Madeline said softly. She hadn't turned around. She was looking at the joinery of the mantel. Dovetail notch, hand-hewn. I stopped the poker in my hand. "Yeah." She turned then. The firelight caught the sharp angle of her cheekbones and the tired shadows under her eyes. She looked out of place, a piece of modern art dropped into a lumber yard, but her eyes were sharp, assessing the structure with professional weight. "You're an architect," I guessed. I was. I don't know," she murmured, rubbing her temple. "Right now I'm just a woman blocking your heat." She stepped aside to let me pass. The scent of her expensive vanilla and rain hit me like a physical blow. It was distinct, clean, and terrifyingly feminine in a room that smelled only of sawdust and coffee. "I'm Cillian," I said, extending a hand. My palm was rough, calloused from years of gripping axes and chisels. Her hand was cool, her grip firm. "Madeline, this is my sister Paisley." "We really appreciate this," Paisley chirped, flopping onto my one leather armchair. "We'll be out of your hair the second the sun comes up. Promise." I nodded, but my gut churned. I walked to the window. The rain was sleeting sideways now. The service road was a river of sludge. On the table by the door, a letter sat unopened. Notice of intent to condemn. Riggs' final warning. I had 4 days to finish the structural support size and pass the safety audit. I looked back at them. Paisley was scrolling on a dead phone. Madeline was watching me, her eyes tracking the tension in my shoulders. "I hope you're right," I said. "Because if this storm keeps up, nobody's going anywhere." The power died at 8:00 p.m. The cabin plunged into darkness, save for the orange glow of the wood stove. The wind howled like a wounded animal slamming against the north wall. "Okay, that's spooky," Paisley whispered. I lit the kerosene lamps, the hiss of the gas the only sound inside. The temperature outside was dropping fast. "Arrangements," I said, keeping my voice practical. "There's the loft. It has a mattress. There's the couch down here. And there's the floor." "We can't take your bed," Madeline said immediately. "We're imposing enough." "You're taking the bed," I said. It wasn't a suggestion. Heat rises. The loft is the warmest spot. If the temperature drops below freezing tonight, down here we'll get cold fast. "We can share it," Paisley offered. "Madeline kicks, but I can handle it." I looked at Madeline. She was hugging her arms, that tremor back. She was exhausted. I could see it in the slackness of her jaw, the way she leaned against the heavy timber post, as if it were the only thing holding her upright. "I'll take the floor by the stove," I said. "I have a sleeping bag." Cillian, no, Madeline started. I met her eyes. "I don't argue about safety, Madeline. Go up." She held my gaze for a second, then nodded once. A silent concession to logic. I watched them climb the ladder. I listened to the rustle of fabric, the murmur of their voices. It felt intimate in a way that made my skin prickle. I laid my sleeping bag on the hard pine planks, staring up at the rough-hewn beams I'd set with my own hands. Above me, the floorboards creaked. I heard Madeline sigh, a long, heavy sound of release. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. I was hyper-aware of her presence 12 feet above me. For 3 years, this cabin had been a fortress of solitude. Now every sound she made the shift of a blanket, a soft cough felt like it was rewriting the atmosphere. At 2:00 a.m., a crash outside woke me. I was up and in my boots in 4 seconds. A massive branch had come down on the porch roof. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the door. The wind nearly ripped it from my hand. I stepped out into the chaos to check the damage. The roof held. I turned back to the door and found Madeline standing there in the frame, wrapped in one of my flannel shirts she must have found. She had pulled on the spare thermal leggings I kept for freezing nights, the flannel hanging low over them. "Is it bad?" she yelled over the wind. "Structure's fine," I yelled back. I stepped inside and wrestled the door shut, locking out the storm. We stood there in the sudden quiet. She was close, too close. I could see the pulse in her neck. She looked at me, wet and wild-haired, her eyes wide. "You're soaking wet," she said. "I'm waterproof." She didn't smile. She reached out, her fingers hovering near my arm but not touching. "You built this place to last." "I built it to stand," I corrected. "It's the same thing." She shivered. Without thinking, I kept my hands in my pockets, fists clenched tight against the urge to reach out and rub warmth into her arms. "Go back to bed, Madeline." She looked at me, a question in her eyes I didn't want to answer, then turned and climbed the ladder. I stayed by the door, listening to her breathing settle, knowing my solitude was gone for good. Morning brought light, but no relief. The rain had stopped, but the damage was done. The service road was gone, washed out completely in 3 sections. My truck, parked on the high ground, was trapped. Their sedan was buried to the wheel wells in a mudslide. So Paisley said, staring at the carnage, with a coffee mug in hand. "We're technically homeless now. We're stranded," I said. "It'll take me 2 days to clear enough debris to get the truck out." "Maybe 3. Madeline stood on the porch, staring at her phone. No signal. Still. "You won't get any until the cloud cover breaks," I said. "The tower is solar-linked on the next peak. It glitches in heavy storms." She turned panic, finally cracking her composure. "I have a deadline, Cillian. A massive one. If I don't upload the renderings for the Seaport project by Friday, my firm triggers a penalty clause. I could lose my license." "Friday is 4 days away," I said, "and we're stuck on a mountain." "I have a satellite uplink," I said. "For emergencies. Its slow bandwidth is garbage, but it sends data." Her shoulders dropped 3 inches. "Can I use it?" "It's in the shed. Generator runs it. But fuel is low." She straightened up. "I'll pay for the fuel. I'll pay for the food. I'll pay for the inconvenience. Just tell me the rate." I looked at her. She was trying to turn this into a transaction, a business deal. She pulled a slim notebook from her tote, flipped to a clean page, and started drawing careful columns: fuel, groceries, labor. Her hand trembled, but every number landed perfectly under the line, as if straight edges could keep the world from shaking. "I don't want your money, Madeline. Everyone wants money, Cillian, especially when they have a condemned notice on their entry table." She'd seen the letter. I stepped closer, invading her space just enough to block the cold wind hitting her back. "I trade in labor. You want to use my uplink? You help me prep the site for the inspection. Paisley can cook. You know structures. Fine. Help me brace the retaining wall." She blinked, surprised. She looked at my hands and then my face. "I'm an architect, Cillian. I design skyscrapers. I don't dig ditches. Gravity doesn't care about your degree," I said softly. "The wall needs bracing. You help me. I give you the uplink." She set her jaw. A spark of defiance lit her eyes, making them gold in the morning light. "Fine," she said. "Give me a shovel." The next 3 days were a blur of mud, sweat, and strange, quiet intimacy. Paisley took over the kitchen. She was actually a decent cook, turning my canned beans and venison jerky into stews that smelled like home. But the real shift happened outside. Madeline wasn't built for heavy labor, but she was tenacious. She tied her hair back, rolled up the sleeves of my borrowed flannel, and worked. I was resetting the drainage pipe. It was miserable work, cold mud sucking at our boots. I watched her struggle with a heavy cedar post. "Let me," I said, stepping in. "I got it," she grunted, leveraging her weight. She slipped her shoulder, hitting my chest. I caught her. My hands gripped her waist to steady her. She was solid real. She looked up, breathless. There was a smear of mud on her cheek. "You're stubborn," I said, not letting go. "I'm competent," she countered, though her voice was breathless. "You're freezing." I noticed her hands shaking, not from fear, but from the cold. I stripped off my heavy work gloves. "Put these on, then you'll have nothing. My hands are used to it." I forced the gloves into her hands. They were massive on her, swallowing her fingers. She looked at the gloves, then at me. "Why are you doing this, Cillian? You could have just let us sit inside." "The wall needs to hold," I said, turning back to the trench. "And I like watching you work," I didn't say. That night the dynamic shifted. We sat around the wood stove. Paisley was asleep on the couch. Madeline was sketching on a pad of graph paper I'd found for her. I was sharpening my chisels, the rhythmic shh, shh of the stone filling the room. "You have a good eye," she said suddenly. I looked up. For wood, for space. The way you oriented the cabin. Morning light in the kitchen, evening sun on the deck. It's thoughtful. It's just logic. "It's not just logic," she said softly. "It's care. Most people build to impress. You built this to protect." My chisel stopped mid-stroke. The grit on the stone went quiet. I opened my mouth to call it logic, to shrug it off the way I always did. But the words wouldn't line up. I just stared at her, feeling the heat from the stove and the weight of what she'd seen. She stood up and walked over to me. She picked up the chisel I had just finished. "My father was a carpenter before he drank himself out of the trade. Is that why you became an architect, to control the build?" She smiled, a sad, fleeting thing. "Maybe. To make sure the walls didn't fall down." She handed the chisel back. Her fingers brushed mine. I pulled my hand back a fraction too quickly, keeping it at arm's length. The air between us crackled heavy and hot. I glanced at the clock and then at the rain smearing the window. "If your deadline matters, we don't gamble on a generator that's half choked and cold." Madeline's brows drew together. "What does that mean?" "It means you come with me," I said. "You don't touch anything with a plug unless I say so." I grabbed my keys, a rag, and a flashlight. We crossed to the shed with the wind snapping at our jackets. Inside, the generator sat like a stubborn animal, metal sweating pull cord stiff. I popped the side panel and went to work by feel. Fuel line, choke, spark plug. "Is that safe?" she asked, voice small in the hollow space. "It's mechanical," I said. "It's honest." The plug was fouled. I scraped carbon off it with my pocket knife, wiped it clean, and drained a muddy ounce of water from the carb bowl into a jar. Madeline leaned in, holding the flashlight steady, not asking to be rescued, just making sure I could see. "Pull the cord when I tell you," I said. She set her feet, nodded once. "Now." She yanked. The engine coughed, died, and then coughed again, like it was deciding whether to forgive me. Again. She pulled hard. I feathered the choke, tapped the throttle linkage, and the generator finally caught an angry, steady roar that filled the shed with vibration and heat. Madeline's shoulders loosened, like she'd been holding her breath for days. I didn't look at her when I spoke. Rule 1, nothing else draws power while you upload. A pause. From the cabin, Paisley's hairdryer whined faintly, then cut off. I raised my voice without turning. "Paisley, eh?" Beat later, her reply floated back through the storm, too cheerful. "I didn't plug it in, I swear." Madeline's mouth twitched, almost a smile. She means well. "She's chaos," I said, but my tone wasn't cruel. It was just true. We ran the cable back to the cabin. I set the satellite unit on its stand, angled the face toward the clearing, and tightened the clamps until the dish stopped shuddering in the wind. "Up here," I said, tapping the bracket. "It has to see sky. No trees. No excuses." Madeline watched every step like she was memorizing it, like competence was the only comfort she trusted. When the uplink lights finally steadied, I handed her the laptop. "You send. I'll keep the power clean." "The uplink is ready," I said, my voice rough. "You can send your files." She didn't move away. "Thank you, Cillian." Friday came. The sun broke through. The retaining wall was done. It was ugly, braced with emergency timber, but it was solid. Madeline had uploaded her files with 3 minutes to spare. We were celebrating with a pot of fresh coffee Paisley had brewed. I was outside checking the service road. The mud had dried enough to be passable for the truck. I could drive them to town today. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. I didn't want them to go. I didn't want her to go. I walked back to the cabin rehearsing what I'd say. Stay another day. The roads are still bad. Lies. I walked in the door and froze. Madeline was standing by the table, her face white. Paisley was holding her phone, looking guilty. "What happened?" I asked. Madeline held up her phone. The screen glowed with the firm's name. "He can't open the file," she said, voice tight. "He says it's unreadable." She tapped the screen and put it on speaker. Madeline, her boss, barked, clipped and impatient. "I don't care where you are. I need you in the office today. Bring a hard set. I want you standing in front of the client table when I call the meeting." Madeline swallowed. "The road's washed out. There's been slides. I can resend from the uplink when the generator stabilizes." "No." His voice went colder. "I'm not trusting satellite uploads for this account. If you're serious about being senior architect, you show up. Today." Madeline turned her head and stared past the window. The canyon was still bruised from the storm. Snow clung to the pines in heavy sheets. Runoff carved brown seams through the white, and the service road I'd tested 10 minutes ago looked like a ribbon laid over mud, soft slick, waiting to give way. Then her eyes dropped to me. I was leaning against the counter, one forearm, wrapped knuckles raw, shoulders sagging in that exhausted way you only get when you've pushed past the last clean mile. I wasn't complaining. I wasn't asking. I was just there, still holding the house together. Madeline's jaw tightened. "The road is washed out," she said into the phone, each word steady. "I'm not risking my life for a render." A beat of silence. "Then don't come back," he snapped. "If you're not here by end of day, we'll find someone who takes this work seriously." Madeline didn't flinch. "Understood," she said. "Find them." She ended the call. Paisley's face crumpled. "Maddie, I'm so sorry. When you were sending, I plugged my hairdryer into the strip. It surged." I didn't think Madeline held up a hand, not angry, just final. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly, looking back out at the canyon. He heard storm and still chose profit. She set the phone down on the table like it weighed 100 pounds. Then the second blow, a heavy knock on the door frame. We all turned. Councilman Riggs stood there, flanked by a man in a safety vest. "Morning," Cillian Riggs smirked. Inspector's schedule opened up. "We're doing the audit, now." He looked at Madeline and Paisley. "And I see you're running an unlicensed bed and breakfast. That's a zoning violation. Add it to the list. A safety incident forces a shutdown." Rigg pointed to the temporary bracing Madeline and I had installed. "That timber isn't code graded. This site is unsafe. I'm issuing a stop work order immediately." The room exploded into chaos. Rigg was barking orders. The inspector was taking photos of the wall. Madeline stood up. The grief on her face vanished, replaced by cold fury. That timber is Douglas fir, she said, her voice cutting through Rig's bluster. Structural grade 1. I checked the stamp myself. Rig sneered. And who are you, the maid? I stepped forward, my fists balling. Watch your mouth, Rig. Madeline put a hand on my chest, stopping me. She stepped around me, facing Rig. She looked impeccable even in my oversized flannel. I am Madeline Vance, Senior Architect for Sterling and Associates. And I can tell you that under State Code 14B, emergency retaining structures are permitted for 30 days post-storm event. Rig blinked. You're an architect, I am. And I'm prepared to write a formal affidavit certifying this structure's integrity. Unless you'd prefer I call the State Ethics Board and report you for harassment of a private landowner, Rig turned red. He looked at the inspector. The inspector shrugged. She's right about the code, Rig. Rig pointed a finger at me. Fine. But the B&B violation stands. You have guests. This is a commercial operation. They aren't guests, I said. Then what are they? I looked at Madeline. She was watching me, her eyes wide, waiting. She's my partner, I lied. She lives here. And Paisley is family. Rig narrowed his eyes. We'll see about that. You have 1 week to prove residency or clear the site. He turned and stormed off. When the door closed, the adrenaline crashed. Madeline slumped against the table. Partner, she asked, a small smile ghosting her lips. It was the only way I said. I looked at Paisley. And you? The hairdryer Paisley burst into tears. I'm sorry, I just wanted to look nice in case we got rescued. Madeline sighed, pulling her sister into a hug. It's okay, Pay. It's okay. It's not okay, I said. You lost your job. Madeline pulled away. She looked around the cabin. He told me to get back to the city today in this storm and hand-deliver a hard set like it was 1998. When I said no, he made it simple: show up or you're done. 15 years, and my safety didn't make the list. Maybe I didn't lose anything I wanted to keep. She walked over to the window, looking out at the wall we built. You saved my land, I said to her back. You gave me a place to sleep, she replied. I walked up behind her. I noticed the tension in her neck and reached out, stopping just an inch from her skin. Stay, I said. The road is open. You can go. But I want you to stay. She turned. Her eyes searched mine. For how long, Cillian? Until the audit passes? Until you want to leave? Madeline stayed. Paisley took the car and went to town to stay at a motel. She needed Wi-Fi and less nature. But Madeline stayed. For 3 days, we lived in a bubble. She sketched renovations for the loft. I finished the railing. We cooked together. We didn't touch, but the air between us was so charged, it felt like a storm was trapped inside the cabin. Then the real storm returned. A massive system worse than the first slammed into the ridge. The temperature plummeted. The rain turned to heavy, wet snow. We were in the loft. The wind was shaking the entire frame. It's shifting, Madeline said, sitting up in the dark. The wind load is too high for the north gable. It needs cross-bracing. I don't have the timber inside, I said. It's in the shed. We have to get it. We suited up. The walk to the shed was a nightmare. The snow was blinding. We grabbed 2 2x6 and fought our way back. As we reached the porch, a gust ripped a loose sheet of plywood from the roof. It flew down, slicing my arm open before slamming into the rail. I grunted, dropping the wood. Blood soaked my sleeve instantly. Cillian and Madeline dragged me inside. She pushed me onto the bench by the stove. The cut was deep. I need the first aid kit, she ordered. Her architect calm was back. She cleaned the wound, her hands steady. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She just fixed me. We still need to brace the wall, I gritted out, trying to stand. "Sit down," she ordered. Her voice didn't shake. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine," I lied, already reaching for the brace. She grabbed my wrist, firm, undeniable. "Cillian, don't be reckless. Be useful." That hit harder than the cold. I sat only because she was right for once. Then I stood again anyway, slower, controlled. I planted my boots wide shoulder to the wall and lifted the 2A6 into position with my good arm braced against the timber post. "Hold it," Madeline said. She slid in beside me with the drill. "Don't move." "I don't move," I said. She drove the first screw. The brace bit into place. I held steady through the burn in my shoulder and the sting in my cut. Second screw. Third. The frame stopped its groaning the way a body stops shaking when it finally finds balance. Madeline lowered the drill breath, coming fast, and looked at me like she'd just watched a man refuse to let a house fall. "It's set," she said. "Yeah," I answered. "It's set." She looked at me. I looked at her. The fear, the adrenaline, the days of restraint, it all snapped. I stood up, ignoring the pain in my arm. I crossed the room in 2 strides. "Madeline." She turned. I didn't give her a chance to talk. I framed her face with my good hand and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It tasted like fear and relief and rain. She inhaled sharply, then met me halfway, her hands gripping my shirt and pulling me closer. I pulled back, breathing hard, resting my forehead against hers. "I'm not letting you go," I whispered. "Not for Rig. Not for your job. Not for anyone." "I don't want to go," she whispered back. The storm broke 2 days later. We woke up in the loft, close enough to share heater hair across my shoulder, our hands still linked under the quilt. The sun was brilliant against the snow. It was perfect. Until the phone rang. It was Paisley. Signal was back. "Maddie, guess what I called? Sterling and Associates." I told them about the power surge. The client refused to meet with anyone else. They said the project was hers or it was dead. They want you back. They're offering you a promotion. Senior partner. Madeline sat up, holding the phone. "What, they want you in New York on Monday. They're sending a car to the motel." Madeline lowered the phone. She looked at me. The reality of the world crashed back in. She was a senior partner. I was a guy with a half-finished cabin and a muddy truck. "You should go," I said, my voice feeling like gravel. "It's what you wanted. Validation." She looked at the phone, then at me. "Is that what you think I want? I think you're an architect, Madeline. You build skyscrapers. You don't brace cabins in the woods." She stood up, pulling on her clothes. She didn't argue. She just looked sad. "Maybe you're right," she said. She packed her bag. I drove her to town in silence. I dropped her at the motel where Paisley was waiting. "Goodbye, Cillian," she said. I kept my hands in my pockets. "Goodbye, Madeline." I drove back to the cabin. It felt empty. It felt like a tomb. A week passed. I passed the inspection. Rig was furious, but the paperwork held up. The affidavit Madeline had written before she left was bulletproof. I was sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. The cabin was too quiet. The stove ticked as it cooled, and every pop of the fire sounded sharp like a branch snapping in the dark. Her mug still sat by the sink, rinsed and upside down, and the empty space beside it felt louder than the wind. I heard a car engine. My heart hammered. I stood up. A truck pulled up, a delivery truck. A guy jumped out. Delivery for Cillian Thorne. He unloaded a crate. I pried it open. Inside was a high-end architectural drafting table and a note. "For the loft. The light is better up there." I looked up. A silver sedan was coming up the road behind the truck. Madeline stepped out. She wasn't wearing her city blazer. She was wearing jeans and boots. She walked up to the porch. She was holding a suitcase. I turned down the partnership, she said. Why? Because they wanted me to build glass boxes. I want to build things that last. She dropped the suitcase. She knelt down and unzipped it. It wasn't full of clothes. It was full of blueprints. I started my own firm, she said, looking up at me. Vance and Thorne. If you're interested. I handle the design. You handle the build. Thorne? I asked, my throat tight. Ideally. She stood up. I'm staying, Cillian. Not for one night. For all of them. I didn't hesitate this time. I didn't keep my hands in my pockets. I grabbed her and lifted her off her feet. She laughed, a sound that filled the empty spaces of the canyon. We have work to do, she whispered against my neck. Yeah, I said, carrying her toward the door. And we'll do it the right way. Together. When I kicked the door shut behind us, the storm finally felt far away.